I'm Jeff Cornwall, and this is The Entrepreneurial Mind. Today our guest is David Harris. We'll be back to talk with him after this. Welcome, David.
Thanks.
So, the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey began at not a typical kind of launching point. Is that fair to say?
It's very fair to say that. Very fair to say that it's a non-typical journey that I've been on for a long time, but especially in my entrepreneurial years.
You were leaving incarceration. You were leaving prison, and that's really where you started to kind of do the sort of hustling that a lot of entrepreneurs have to do to get started. Can you talk about that how that all got started?
Sure. Yeah, and in fact, I look back and see that the entrepreneurial spirit in me was born of a dark space in my life, which was being in custody, being incarcerated for, doing things back in my misspent youth. And in that time, in that crucible of being incarcerated, I sort of realized that that I had to be responsible for me for the rest of my life, with the disability kind of being the background, and with my motivation being the key to everything and my ability to perform in whatever I was going to do. I knew going forward that I had to be responsible for everything going forward. So upon leaving prison, I waited tables briefly just to get money in my pocket, but within weeks, I was already selling paralegal services to local attorneys in town.
So how do you do that? I mean, if you're just a few weeks out of prison, how do you connect with these attorneys, and how do you convince them to allow you to write what can be pretty technical kind of documents?
Good question. Inside the prison, I had been exposed, which is par for the course in a prison environment. There's legal study and learning all around. Right. Everywhere. There's prison libraries in every prison, according to federal and state rules and law. So I had familiarized myself with the language and the vernacular of the court system, having gone through that process myself as well. So I was in the custom of helping other prisoners who weren't able to understand their own positions and things inside the prison. In fact, one of my jobs inside the prison, which everyone works inside a prison, was to assist in the law library, and I became intimately familiar over the course of 7 years with legal processes and terms and terminology and procedures in general. So leaving the prison environment, I had made connections with attorneys who were defense attorneys, who were the defense attorneys of people who were incarcerated with me. I had assisted them, those attorneys, with research for cases that were guys in prison. And I kept those names and connections because I knew already, the entrepreneurial spirit being born in me, that connections are everything.
So what was your sales pitch?
My sales pitch was, nobody knows this stuff like I do, because my life once depended on it, and I can bring that passion and understanding and fire to your practice.
And how well received was that? Did you have a lot of strikeouts, or was it traction that kind of got going pretty good?
Looking back, I didn't have a lot of strikeouts, because the few attorneys who I contacted with my services, in the very beginning, I performed those services very reasonably, and I might even say that I did some for free, just to expose them to the work, just to show them the work. Yeah. And quickly thereupon, because there's a big need for this for smaller entrepreneurial-minded attorneys in town, they need quality research done by people who really understand the process. They can't afford employees as much as they can afford to pay a contract or a project basis, to pay on a project basis. So I've filled a niche pretty quickly, and one good piece of work turned into another, which turned into another and another, and word travels fast in this community, in the legal community.
So were you ever tempted just to kind of build and grow that? I mean, that in itself sounds like a pretty fruitful kind of a venture to build.
I did. I ultimately had more than 50 attorneys in my umbrella, and I went to, after finishing 2 years of undergrad at that pace, I entered into law school, and I paid for my own law school doing this business.
But did you ever think, maybe I don't even need to go to law school, I can just continue to do this work, or was that something that was burning inside of you that you wanted to take this further?
It was burning inside of me, and again, that's the entrepreneurial spirit that was born in me, was that I must realize my maximum potential. And, you know, there's all kinds of roadblocks to a convicted felon.
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, you had more than just filling out the application, taking the LSAT to get over.
Oh, yeah, I had much more than that. Even if I successfully navigated the LSAT and law school and the bar exam and the ethics exam, I could have still been denied a law license to practice even at the end of that road.
Right.
And I was perfectly aware of that. And I was perfectly well prepared to be just a very well-educated paralegal if I needed to be.
So what did you have to overcome? What was the process you had to go through to kind of get to the point where you finally had your license?
Aside from all the things I just mentioned, which every candidate to become
every
a lawyer
lawyer does that,
has to go through those things I just mentioned, I had to not sue, but I had to put on a hearing in front of the Board of Law Examiners, which is the body that's responsible for approving new attorneys, and I had to have a full-on trial on specifically on the issue of my character, and had my character been rehabilitated enough in all the processes I had gone through since the time of my crimes.
Oh, and they probably had to go back and dredge up all the stuff that
they did. It was
got you into that
situation. It was another rite of passage that I had to endure, and I had to answer questions about things that happened 15, 20 years prior.
Right.
And not only that, I had to put on witnesses to that effect, and I had to convince all 5 board members that my character was worthy of a law license. They had the full authority to say no, see you later, and I had no way to sue or had no recourse about that. So
which probably would have been the easy thing for them to do.
Of course they could have. All it would have taken was one to say no.
Yeah.
And I knew that going in. So put on a big hearing and all afternoon into the night one night there. And by the time it was all over, they all congratulated me and granted me a law license.
So you knew right then and there?
Right then and there.
Wow. Wow.
It was particularly moving that day, probably the most moving day I've had since being released from custody.
Oh, I can't even imagine
to be
what you felt
congratulated
like.
by those folks, you know, and they had the full authority just to say, see you later, you know, go away.
Well, that would have been the easy thing for them to do, but I mean, that gives you a little bit of hope in the system that it gave you a shot like that.
Gave me a lot of hope in the system, and I'm still moving forward with that momentum now.
So now you have your own law practice, and I mean, Lord knows you couldn't have imagined that in the early 2000s. You're dressed up in a tie and practicing law, and so what kind of a law practice are you doing now? Have you kind of carried forward what you had built on as a paralegal, or
Sure. In the community, it's known as sort of, I can analogize it with a medical practice. It's a general practice. I am a solo practitioner, as they call it, which means I don't have a firm that backs me.
Right.
I don't have a boss. I don't have underlings or things like that. I do everything myself, essentially just like the attorneys were that I was working for when I first got out of prison. And my strongest asset is my ability to write, to read, comprehend, and analyze the law. So I found a real niche in doing appellate work, which is written advocacy in front of appeals courts, including the Court of Appeals, Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Tennessee Supreme Court. And I've won several, I've lost a bunch, but I'm recognized by my peers as being very good at that. So someday I think I'll probably practice predominantly appellate work and make a living from that.
Are you working out of an office or at home, or how much you have to bootstrap
Well, I work at home as well, but yeah, I have an office. I have a full office with, you know, everything. I have a receptionist that I pay for. I share the building. Several attorneys are there.
Right, one of the space sharing kind of things.
Sure.
How does it feel to refer to attorneys as your peers? I mean, you just said that, and after hearing your story, that's an amazing word, really.
It is an amazing word, and it's an amazing concept, and I'm still pretty fresh into it. I've only been practicing a little over a year now, so I still find myself sometimes sort of defaulting to a status of assistant all the time. I want to help everyone, and I forget that I myself am responsible utterly for the cases that I have. But yeah, it's pretty surreal to be on the level that I am, having come so far in such a short amount of time.
Well, David, that's one of the more inspiring entrepreneurial stories I've heard in a long time. Thanks for sharing it.
Thank you for having me.